And welcome everyone to this session. We are continuing our discussion on the foundational text of Indian philosophy. So please remember, though this is a continuation, each session is more or less independent by itself. So even if you have missed the previous session, you can listen to this, and if you want to know more about the background, you can see the previous sessions. So now today we are coming to an important part of this series. As I mentioned in the last session, there are three foundational canonical systems in Vedanta in general, and this is it is much more applicable to Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualistic system, than other systems. It's called Prasthanatraya. Three canonical foundational systems. The first one, the most important one, is the Upanishads. 10 Upanishads which were expounded by Shankaracharya. Isha, Kena, Katha, Prasna, Mundaka, Mandukya, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka. All of them are from different Vedas. For example, Ishavasya Upanishad is from Shukla Yajurveda. You know, Yajurveda has got two divisions. One is Shukla Yajurveda, the other is Krishna Yajurveda. So if you are reading any of the English translations, you may come across this term, the white, that is Shukla Yajurveda, and the black, Krishna Yajurveda. So white means here more or less systematic, well organized. That's the meaning of Shukla Yajurveda, mean white. The black means relatively well organized, but not as well organized as the Shukla Yajurveda. It is less systematic than Shukla Yajurveda. So, Ishavasya Upanishad is from Shukla Yajurveda. This is the first of the 10 Upanishads that Shankaracharya expounded through his commentaries. Kena Upanishad is from Samaveda. Katha Upanishad is from Krishna Yajurveda. Krishna means somewhat less well organized. Prasna Upanishad is from Atharva Veda. Mundaka Upanishad also from Atharva Veda or Atharvana Veda. That is the same. Mandukya Upanishad also from Atharva Veda. Taittiriya Upanishad is from Krishna Yajurveda. And then Aitareya Upanishad from Rig Veda. And that is the only Upanishad in the Prasthanatraya tradition that is from Rig Veda. And Chandogya Upanishad is from Samaveda, just like Kena Upanishad. And Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the most voluminous and in many ways perhaps the most important of the 10 Upanishads, that is called Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is from Shukla Yajurveda. Actually, it is itself means big or great. Brihatvad aranye adhiyamanatvad cha brihadaranyakam. An Upanishad used to be studied by people who were living in isolation in Vedic hermitages, in the Aranya means in forest hermitages. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, when we discussed the 4 asamas, 4 stages in human life, at the 3rd stage, that is after Brahmacharyasama, Vanaprasthasama, and then after Brahmacharyasama, Grihasthasama and Vanaprasthasama. The first stage in our life is the stage when we study the Vedas, when we study in schools or maybe colleges. That stage is called Brahmacharyasama, the period of novitiate. The second one is when a person who has already completed his education, he goes and marries and becomes an householder. That stage is called Grihasthasama, the stage of an householder. the third one is called Vanaprasthasana, the stage of contemplation, when an householder sees his grandchildren growing up and also himself becoming weak or maybe aged, then he starts thinking of some higher values, accumulating spiritual qualities. It should be done much earlier, but there are people who may wait till they get some tragic blows in their life. At least at that stage, they should take to some kind of a contemplative life. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad used to be studied and taught by great saintly people who were living in forest hermitages. And the fourth stage is Sannyasasana, the stage of mendicancy. Mundaka Upanishad is very important for them. So the point is, there are four Vedas. Rigveda is Aitareya Upanishad, Samaveda, the Kena Upanishad and Chandogya Upanishad. Then Atharva Veda, Mundaka Upanishad and Mandukya Upanishad, and the Prasna Upanishad. And Yajurveda has got two divisions, Shukla Yajurveda and Krishna Yajurveda. Krishna Yajurveda means Krishna means black. That is the English translation. So you should not be confused or what is this black? It means less organized. I mean they were not so well organized. So in ancient times they gave this name. That's all. There is nothing else. And Shukla Yajurveda. Now a few things about this Upanishad. What do we mean by Upanishads? This is an important subject to remember. What is the meaning of Upanishad? You must have read some Upanishads. You must have, some of you must have heard, especially those who are living in Western countries, you must have heard about a great Indologist who lived in 19th century. He was an outstanding scholar and Indologist. His name is Paul Deussen, a very famous person. Actually, he was much more learned than Max Muller, maybe arguably, maybe the greatest Sanskritist and Indologist the Western world ever produced. His name was Paul Deussen. And he lived, though he lived in Europe, he was a German by nationality. You know, this was the glorious times when Indian philosophy, Sanskrit language, Vedic culture were becoming the focus of attention of many, not only academics and spiritual seekers, but also people who are looking for some universal spiritual value. Especially this trend began the later half of 18th century and continued through 19th century. And Paul Deussen is perhaps the finest fruit of that inquisitiveness that possessed the Western intellectual culture right from 18th and 19th century, through 18th and 19th centuries. Paul Deussen translated no less than 60 Upanishads into German, and then they were of course translated into English. And of course before that, a great, a most unlikely man, Jupiter, his name is Acron. He was a soldier, Frenchman at the service of East India Company, and he just translated some parts of Upanishads into a kind of imperfect Latin. Then they were translated, but they didn't catch much attention, except that Schopenhauer happened to read this well-known book. But the most profound contribution, the most wonderful translations of Upanishads, the credit goes back to that great work to Paul Deussen. Of course, there are other books also in modern times. Dr. Radhakrishnan, Hume, and many have translated, but Paul Deussen works remains still the hallmark of the Western intellectual effort, especially in the world of Upanishadic philosophy. So what is the meaning of Upanishad? You may think Upanishad is the name of a book. It is true. When you buy a book in the market, in the bookshop, you buy a copy of Upanishads. It is certainly Upanishad. But the real meaning of Upanishad, Shankaracharya very clearly explains. This is one important text that we should always remember when we talk about Upanishad, because Upanishads contain the highest, the peak of Indian philosophy and Indian spirituality and mysticism. The meaning of Upanishad is Upanishad iti Upanishad. It means something that helps us to go beyond ignorance, beyond delusion, something that takes us to some spiritual enlightenment. So, it comes from a Sanskrit root, and the root is Sat. And then there is a prefix, Upasarga. Upa and Ni, these are two prefixes, plus Sat, the Sanskrit root. And there is also a pratyaya, means a suffixes, pratyaya, prefixes, Upasarga. What is added before is Upasarga, what is added later is pratyaya. There is a quick pratyaya. So the meaning is this: the dhatu itself means Visharana Gati Avasadana. So Shankaracharya says, Sade dhatoho Visharana Gati Avasadanarthasya Upanipurvasya Kipratyantasya Rupam Idam Upanishad Idi. Sadehi dhatoho Visharana Gati Avasadanarthasya. This is an important term. Sad dhatu, the word, the Sat dhatu, the Sanskrit root from which the word Upanishad derives, Upanishad is derived. Sat means Visharana. Visharana means smashing, destroying. Gati means taking you towards. It helps you to attain. Avasadana means going away. What does it mean? Ignorance goes away. Confusions, misunderstandings, all destroyed. And it will take you to your spiritual destination. So, all confusions, ignorance, wrong understandings, all go away. That is Visharana and Avasadana, these two. And a Gati means something that helps you to attain. Gati means attaining your goal. So, Upanishad is that which helps you to destroy all illusions, conflicts, wrong perceptions, wrong understanding, and helps you to attain your spiritual destination. Okay, this is the meaning of the dhatu or the root from where the Sanskrit word Upanishad comes. Now, of course, there are these, upasargas. Upasarga means, prefix. Upa, sami, pi. I mean, it used to be studied from a teacher. In that sense, sami, pi. And then it used to be studied by students who were humble. So, humility, a sense of sanctity and sacredness, with which you study spiritual philosophy, which helps you to get out of ignorance, to destroy ignorance, to remove wrong notions. This is the real meaning of Upanishad. Now, you have to remember, this really happens only when you get a spiritual experience. If you study Upanishads of Vedanta, something interesting happens to everyone. You know what is that interesting thing? The point is, suppose you are a Hindu. You will understand the most universal, spiritual, humanistic teachings of Hindu tradition. If you are a Christian, it helps you to connect with the most universal, spiritual teachings of Christianity. If you are a Buddhist, it will help you to understand the most universal, the most sacred, humanistic teachings of Buddhism. So whatever tradition you belong to, you are endowed with a skill, a kind of intellectual and mystical skill to connect with the most essential, the most fundamental, underlying spiritual principles of whatever tradition you belong to. In fact, this is the magic of studying Upanishads. Upanishad is not the name of a religion. In fact, it is not even the name of a system of philosophy. Philosophy is only the outer shell of Upanishad. In fact, something interesting is said in the Upanishad literature. Upanishads tell you, for example, all the religious books in the world, including all the Vedas, all the Bibles, all religious scriptures are secondary. What those scriptures teach you, that is the most important thing. So experiencing what that book tells you is most important. Of secondary importance is the books themselves. That means the highest spiritual experience is what enables you to destroy ignorance and conflicts. Philosophy is certainly necessary, very helpful, but philosophy cannot take you, philosophy cannot be substitute to spiritual experience. Spiritual experience comes as a result of studying something, contemplating, and slowly increasing our spiritual fitness to correctly understand the implications of what Upanishads teach, and eventually to experience the reality, the great spiritual truths which are expounded in the Upanishad literature. That's what it means. Now I shall give just a bird view of all the 10 Upanishads, which are very important because Shankaracharya chose these 10 Upanishads and wrote commentaries on these 10 Upanishads. And thereby he showed that the essence, the highest teachings in the Upanishad teach about the spiritual unity and oneness and the fundamental divinity of our real self. That is the central teaching of the Upanishads. So I shall just try to give a bird view of the 10 Upanishads. Then I will try to focus on one important teaching of Advaita philosophy, because that's especially the philosophy of Mithyatvam that I will explain later. Now, first is Ishavasya Upanishad. Ishavasya midam sarvam yat kinja jagatyan jagatena tyaktena bunjitaha magdhakasya. That's how it begins. In fact, the most profound teaching of Upanishad literature, the Vedic literature, is clearly articulated by the first mantra of Ishavasya Upanishad. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. Idam sarvam Ishavasyam. What it means? All that you see around you, everything is enveloped or pervaded by the divine reality, by Atman. Remember, it doesn't mean that trees and mountains and valleys are all pervaded by Atman. Frequently, many people who perhaps may not be able to fully understand the essential meaning of this Vedic literature, which sometimes can be known only from a traditional teacher. They will think, oh, Upanishad tell you everything is divine, this table is divine, this computer is divine, or the mic system is divine. That's not the meaning. What it says is that divine reality, God as an impersonal, all-pervading divine spirit, is all-pervading. That means existence is one. Spiritually speaking, existence is one. Creation is one. That's why Mahatma Gandhi, who was certainly not a Sanskrit scholar, and was certainly not somebody living in a Vedic hermitage, Mahatma Gandhi said once that if all the scriptures disappear from this world, think of, let's say, a world in which all religious mystical literature have gone, ceased to exist. Gandhi says, if the first mantra, if the first statement of the Ishavasya Upanishad remains, there will be no problem, nothing will be lost. What he said was, and remember, he was not a philosopher in the ordinary sense, like an academic philosopher, but he was a great man of spiritual tradition. He was a spiritual person, he was a saintly person. So he said, if everything is gone, still this mantra of Ishavasya Upanishad is enough to preserve the spiritual heritage of humanity. Because the first mantra of Ishavasya Upanishad makes a proclamation, makes a statement about the spiritual oneness and unity of existence and the all-pervading immanent nature of the divine spirit everywhere. The second Upanishad in this hierarchy, it's called Desha Upanishad, means 10 Upanishads, which constitute the primary source of Prasthanatraya, the Sruti Prasthana. They mean the essence of the Vedic literature. It's called Kena Upanishad. Second one is Kena Upanishad. It actually takes a different approach. It says, Kena Shidam Padadi Preshidam Manaha Kena Prana Prathama Praidi Yukta. That's how it begins. What it says is, impelled by whom, directed by what mysterious power are my mind and my senses that taken towards different sensory objects. It means I am seeing different things. Either somebody behind, I am empirically knowing many things. Who is the real knower? I mean, what is the nature of the eternal seer, the eternal perceiver, the eternal knower, the seer of the seen, and the seer of all seers, the one who hears all those who hear. It means, who is the eternal, the ultimate seer, knower? So it finally concludes, this Atman, Brahman, is the ultimate divine principle that is behind everything, behind the senses, behind the mind, behind the intellect. There is that eternal knower. See, senses are able to perceive different things with the help of the mind. When mind and eyes come together, we perceive many things by seeing. If mind is not there, eyes alone cannot identify things. So mind is necessary. Mind should go along with the five senses of perception. Mind should go along with the eyes, with the ears, the sense of touch, sense of smell, and so on. So behind the mind there is the intellect that directs the movement, the activities of mind. And behind even this intellect there is the divine principle. This is how the Kena Upanishad proceeds. And the third Upanishad in this Prasthana series is Kathopanishad. So Kathopanishad has got 120 mantras, slokas, mean verses. It is in the form of a dialogue between a great teacher, and the teacher is an angel, let us say, roughly corresponds to an angel, somebody whose responsibility is taking care of the last minute of every living being. Death is called Yama, the Lord of Death. Lord of Death or Yama is the teacher in the Kathopanishad. And the student is a little boy. The student asks for 3 boons. For there is a story behind. I have already given a series of lectures on this subject that also is available on YouTube. I have given very, very elaborate lectures on each of these Upanishads. So the point is, in the Kathopanishad, the student Nachiketa, he asked for 3 boons. The first boon he is asking is for all material benefit, material welfare. The second boon for going to heaven after death. The third boon is the truth, the mystery of existence. So in answer to that request, Yama expounds the entire Upanishadic philosophy. So Yama says, Atmanam Ridhinam Vidhi, Shariram Rithamevacha, Buddhim tu Saradim Vidhi, Manapragrahamevacha. Like that it continues, whole life is compared to a journey on a chariot. And we are the travelers in that chariot. And our senses are like horses driving the chariot. Our intellect is the driver, and mind is the reins, which helps the driver to control the horses, and the world of senses is the road that we have to travel. So those who are endowed with proper discretion, proper discerning wisdom, they reach their destination. Those who are able to control their senses properly, they are able to reach the destination. Somebody is I think, handling the system. Some sound is coming. Please remain silent, because it can disturb the class itself. This is Kathopanishad. I shall come to these texts elaborately later, but those who are interested, now you can listen to a series of lectures which I gave in each of these Upanishads. A number of series of lectures. And then the fourth one is Prashna Upanishad. Prashna Upanishad. Prashna in Sanskrit means questions. So it is in the form of 6 questions, which 6 students are putting before a teacher. I mean, the guru is a sage, namely Pippalada, and the disciples are Sukesha, Satyagama, Gargya, Ashulayana, Bhargava, Kamanti. So these are the great inquisitive seekers of truth who approach a saint with the name Pippalada, and each of them puts a question to the teacher, and the teacher expounds. And the next Upanishad is Mundaka Upanishad. Mundaka Upanishad is not very elaborate. It is one of the shorter Upanishads, though not as short as Mandukya Upanishad, but it is a relatively short Upanishad compared to Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka. It is unique in many ways. It tells you that learning or knowledge or vidya is twofold. One is the supreme ultimate learning, Paravidya. The other one is Aparavidya, secondary. And here is something interesting. Mundaka Upanishad tells you that all learning, all the so-called sacred books are secondary. What is primary? What is the most important thing in life? The higher knowledge. And the higher knowledge helps you to understand the eternal, the imperishable, the immortal, divine identity of yourself. So, atha para yaya tad aksharam adhigamyate. And so the question is put to a sage by an aged person, he's an householder, and he goes to a sage, he asks a big question. He says, how to live a life in this world, and how to realize the supreme truth of our life, the spiritual identity of our existence. And then, as part of the exposition of this Upanishadic truth, the sage gives the answer, and the answer that he gives is that Vidya is twofold. Devidya Vedita Vivek. 2 types of learning in this world. This is very universal. Any spiritual seeker will agree with this. The first one is the intellectual aspect of Vidya, intellectual part of learning. All the books, including Vedas, including the Upanishads, including the Bible, including the Sermon on the Mount, including all these, they are important. But much more important is experiencing what those books teach you. And that learning, supreme learning, mean what the books teach you, that will help you to understand, to realize the imperishable truth of our existence. That is the meaning. Atha para means para vidya, the supreme vidya, supreme learning. Yaya tat aksharam adhigamyate. That ultimate learning is that by which we come to know the imperishable, the eternal, the immortal truth of existence. This is a very important Upanishad in this sense, because it's a very interesting. I mean, you learn the books, use your reasoning, and then you experience it. It doesn't mean that the secondary learning is unimportant or insignificant, not at all. What it means is, intellectual knowledge is helpful, but intellectual knowledge is not ultimate knowledge. Intellectual knowledge should be studied properly, then contemplated on. You should meditate upon what we learn. And then finally, through meditation, through our own life, we should realize what we learn in books as a fact of our own life. That is the real meaning of this. That's the importance of this Upanishad. The next Upanishad, Mandukya, is also from Atharvaveda. It analyzes the supreme truth as the supreme witness, the seer, the perceiver, the experiencer in all the three states of our existence. Every human being goes through these three stages: waking state, dream state, and deep sleep state. During waking state, we experience many things in this world with the help of mind and senses. And in dream, very often, we reproduce what we experience in waking state, and in deep sleep state, nothing is experienced. But in all the three states, that supreme truth, Atman, Brahman, exists as the one eternal knower, seer, perceiver. And then that truth is called Turiya, and that ultimate seer, the subject of all subjects, the seer of all seers, the knower of all knowledge, that is the Turiya itself, and that is one supreme reality. It's a somewhat intellectual process, and of course I have given at least from 60-70 classes on this Mandukya Upanishad. So these are all available in YouTube. Of course, we will discuss this again as part of this series, not as elaborately. The entire text I have already taught in this on this platform, and you can get audio cassettes and also video cassettes. You can you can get audio and video internet connections. You can get elaborate classes on all these Upanishads. Next one is Taittiriya Upanishad. So Taittiriya Upanishad it teaches something important. It teaches the knower of Brahman becomes one with Brahman. So Brahmavid apnoti param. That's the meaning. That's the central teaching of this Taittiriya Upanishad. Taittiriya Upanishad is very remarkable. It also gives you a lot of lessons on practical life. For example, a student who has completed his Vedic education in the Vedic hermitage is leaving the Vedic school. He goes to his home to marry and play different roles in his life as father, maybe mother or husband, and so on. So how to live a proper family life? It comes in the form of a very wonderful it's called address. It's a address, a kind of speech addressed to students who are leaving the Vedic school. Matrudevo Bhava, Pitudevo Bhava, Acharyadevo, Adithidevo, all these great teachings in your life, you should respect, you should honor, you should deal with reverence your parents, your teacher, your guests. You should practice moderation, you should practice self-restraint in your action, in your thought, in your behavior. You should be a role model as a husband, as a brother, as a sister, as a citizen, as a member of the society, as a citizen of a country, as a human being. You have an obligation to everyone in this world. And along with that, it also teaches the supreme philosophical, spiritual truth. It means the one who realizes Brahman becomes one with Brahman, because we realize what we are looking for, the divine spirit, God as a divine principle, we are looking everywhere. Finally, we realize that that divine principle is within ourselves, not this physical body or body-mind complex, but going beyond all that, it is our own real self. This is the essence of the central teaching of Taittiriya Upanishad. The next one is Aitareya Upanishad. Aitareya Upanishad is also very important because it contains the well-known Mahavakya. It's called, great statement. Prajnanam Brahma means Brahman is the ultimate consciousness. Brahman is awareness. Awareness as such. Without being hooked into any object, the supreme consciousness is Brahman. That teaching comes in the Aitareya Upanishads. So here I am just giving a bird view of the three foundations of Prasthanatraya. And after this, I shall take up each of these. So now important thing to remember, when you are listening to this, you may think that these are all important books and I'm not explaining all this in detail. Please remember, all these Upanishads are being discussed more than once. On many occasions, innumerable lectures you can see in the Vedanta Society of Northern California, San Francisco YouTube system. You can get lectures on Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Ishavasya, Mundaka, Mandukya, Taittiriya. All the Upanishads are already discussed on so many occasions. Sometimes we had retreats on some of these Upanishads. So, of course, we will take up all these as part of this special series as well. The next Upanishad is Chandogya Upanishad. So Chandogya Upanishad is also very important. It also contains one Mahavakya, that is Tattvamasi. The most important Mahavakya is Chandogya Upanishad. In Chandogya Upanishad, surprisingly, if you read the English translation, even you can understand, see, there are social customs discussed, principles of civil administration, principles of proper conduct in society, proper interaction with members, different members of society. You can also get a peep into the social customs, the cultural situations of India of the Upanishadic period if you read the Chandogya Upanishad. This is a very interesting Upanishad. So also next one is Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Chandogya Upanishad is of course from Samaveda. There also you find a number of teachers. For example, Sanat Kumara, great teachers. Janaka, great teachers. Some of the teachers are kings, ruling monarchs. Sometimes very advanced spiritual seekers, ascetics, philosophers. They go to a king and ask him, please teach me supreme spiritual truth. Can you imagine? Ashwapati, he was a king. There are kings of Panchala countries, different countries. Kings are teaching spirituality to learned Brahmins, ascetics and monks. It's all interesting thing. I don't think Plato ever imagined anything like Plato's Republic, philosopher king concept, Rajarshi concept. It's much more commonly found in Brihadaranyaka, like Janaka and others. But in Chandogya also you find Narada is one sage, Sanat Kumara is another sage. So Narada goes Sanat Kumara, asking questions. So this Chandogya Upanishad is very important. You find a lot of history, a lot of sociology, a lot of cultural traditions, a lot of practices that are prevalent. And also you get a picture of a highly evolved society. A society, of course we should remember, the society was not egalitarian as we understand today. It is not a democratic society. Still the age of monarchs. India subcontinent being divided into so many kingdoms. Even in 1947 when India got independence, Indian subcontinent had hundreds of kingdoms in 1947. So you can imagine during the Vedic times, and during the Vedic times, Indian, as a cultural entity, India included today's Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, of course Sri Lanka and all these places, remember. It's a different matter. Uttaram yat samudrasya himadre yacha dakshinam varsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. This is how India is culturally and geographically defined in the Vishnu Purana. Uttaram yat samudrasya himadre yacha dakshinam. So, it means south of the Himalayas and north of Uttaram Yes Samudrasya means north of ocean, you mean Indian Ocean. So in that sense, India is north of Indian Ocean. On one side Arabian Sea, on the southern side Indian Ocean, the other side Bengal, Bengal Bay of Bengal. But this Vishnu Purana defines Indian culture, Indian geographically Indian subcontinent of the Vedic times, of the Upanishadic period. So Uttaram Yes Samudrasya means south of the ocean, and Himadre Yacha Dakshinam, and north of ocean, Uttaram Yes Samudrasya, north of the ocean, northern part of Indian Ocean, and southern part of the Himalayas. Himadre Yaksha Dakshinam. So what is India? India of the Vedic Upanishadic times. You can find in the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishad this picture of the subcontinent and its sociology and its culture and tradition. So south of Himalayas and north of Indian Ocean. And in that particular Varsham Tad Bharatam, that particular geographical region is called Bharata Varsham, and people living in it called India. This is the definition. What it means is, during the Upanishadic times, you can find India was practically a large group of small kingdoms. Of course, many of these kingdoms were larger than today's France or UK or even Germany. That is true, because India was a huge geographical area. So, a lot of sociology, a lot of history, a lot of culture, a lot of folklore you find in the Chandogya Upanishad, which is fairly big Upanishad. Next one is Brihadaranyaka. It also has one Mahavakya called Aham Brahmasmi. There also you find, it's a very, very big, the biggest, the most voluminous of the 10 Upanishads, of the entire Upanishadic literature. Now, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find very profound teachings, discussions of great scholars, and some of them great women philosophers. Gargi is one of the greatest philosopher figures you come across in ancient world. And this lady, one of the most learned philosophers of her time, she comes to a king's court and she challenges all the philosophers and saints and sages assembled in the king's court. There are long discussions on this subject. Gargi and Yajnavalkya together dialogues. And also Yajnavalkya and Maitreyi, Yajnavalkya's wife, there is a long dialogue. Highly philosophical, highly spiritual. So this is the nature of the most important part of Prasthanatraya. But remember, in all these discussions, there is something unique about them. The main focus is, what is the ultimate purpose of human life? What is the secret of human existence? What is our true nature? And what is our relationship with the rest of the world? What should be our relationship with the other living beings, the animal kingdom? In what way are we connected to the environment in which we are living? All these profound questions are discussed in these Upanishads. So, we will take up these Upanishads later on, one by one. And now we are coming to the most complicated and the most abstract part of the Prasthanatraya. It's called Brahma Sutra. Brahma Sutra, Sutra means a pithy statements, a brief statement, which cannot be clearly understood without a commentary. As I mentioned earlier, the Panini's Ashtadhyayi contains sutras which are only 2 letters. And some of the sutras in other philosophical traditions are also very brief. In Prasthanatraya, Brahma Sutra occupies a unique place. 555 sutras. In some versions you find 554. They are called Badarayana Sutras. The only absolutely complete exposition of the entire text is found in Shankaracharya's tradition. And Shankaracharya's commentary was preceded by many previous attempts to explain Brahma Sutras. But after Shankaracharya's commentary became known, all other pre-Shankarite commentaries, commentaries written before Shankaracharya's time, they became irrelevant. Practically they became redundant. Nobody bothered about them further. So after Shankaracharya wrote the commentary on the Brahma Sutras, other great Indian philosophers, Vedantins like Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, later on, in all other traditions, they wrote commentaries on Brahma Sutras. So Shankaracharya expounds the theory that the ultimate essential meaning of all Shastras, all Vedic teachings is the unity and oneness of existence as expounded in the Upanishads. That is called Samannvaya-dhyaya. Brahma Sutra has got 4 chapters. So, and in subsequent chapters, like Avirodha-dhyaya, Sadhana-dhyaya and Phala-dhyaya, Shankaracharya expounds this theory. And it is a very unique work. Of course, it requires a teacher for you to study, but translations are available. The great studies were made on this book, and Shankaracharya quotes from different Upanishads, especially from Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and of course all other Upanishads, even from other Upanishads which are not mentioned in the Prasthanatraya tradition, in the Shankaracharya commentary tradition, like Kaushitagi, which doesn't have a commentary by Shankaracharya, Kaivalya Upanishad, not commented upon by Shankaracharya. Even these Upanishads are referred to in Shankaracharya's commentary on the Prasthanatraya. And of course, next one is Bhagavad Gita. So remember the 10 Upanishads, and 10 Upanishads belong to Sruti Prasthana. Prasthanatraya belong to Nyaya Prasthana. Analysis of the supreme truth using the tool of logic, of reasoning, power of reasoning. And the next one is Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is something interesting. There is something very unique about Bhagavad Gita. Now, it is part of a very large classical work, Mahabharata, which has got 2-3 well-accepted versions. The larger versions have got much more than 100,000 verses, but the standard version has a little more than 100,000 slokas, verses. 100,000 verses. That is the extensiveness of Mahabharata. That means much bigger than Virgil's Aeneid, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey put together. If you multiply it a few times, you get Mahabharata. That's the extensiveness of the work. Hundreds of kings, saints and sages, and lot of philosophical dialogues. And remember, Bhagavad Gita is a tiny fraction, a tiny fragment of Mahabharata. Only 700 verses. If you are an impartial critic using the tools of literary criticism, you find there are other Gitas in the Mahabharata. Gita means something that is sung by somebody. Vyadha Gita. There are many other Uttara Gita, many other Gitas are the Mahabharata itself. But Bhagavad Gita became so unique because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on this. And remember, when did he write all this? He was walking, traveling from place to place, 32 years he lived, started his monastic career when he was less than 7 years. And he wrote all these commentaries from the Upanishads. And he was not carrying a huge load of books or any kind of computer. So he said, he has studied all this and put in his head. As he traveled, in his mind he arranged all the Upanishads, because the Upanishads mantras were not specially detached from Vedas. That's an important thing to remember. Vedas were like a forest. And these Upanishads together, all the 10 Upanishads together, constitute only very, very tiny fraction if you compare the entire Vedic literature. 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, Atharva Veda. And of course, Yajur Veda has got 2 divisions, Shukla Yajur Veda and Krishna Yajur Veda. So as he walked from temple to temple, most of the time he was traveling, walking to temples, writing poetry, standing in front of different deities. At the same time he was expounding an idea of a God that is beyond temples. So this man went to every temple. If you go anywhere in India, you find they all tell you Shankaracharya. If you go to Tripura, which is east of Bangladesh, they will tell you he came to Tripureswari temple. If you go to West India, they will tell you he came to Somanatha temple. If you go to South India, there are all the temples, Kanchi, Mathura, Meenakshi, all these temples he visited. And so the extreme north, Badrinath, Kedarnath, close to China border. Now, in his mind, he detached all the philosophical portions of the Vedas and then wrote commentaries on them. Similarly, he detached the small tiny fragment Bhagavad Gita, 700 verses, for the entire classical work of more than 100,000 verses. And he wrote a commentary on it. From that time onwards, Bhagavad Gita became an immortal spiritual classic. So Swami Vivekananda, in his lecture, Sages of India, it comes in the Colombo to Almora lectures. Mostly you find the 3rd volume of complete works of Vivekananda. And where Swamiji says, and he gives a long list of the great things Shankaracharya did. And surprisingly, Swamiji says, his greatest contribution was the popularization of Bhagavad Gita. In fact, Gita is not as abstract, not as philosophical. Gita commentary is not as abstract or as philosophical, as dialectical as Shankaracharya's commentaries on the Upanishads or the Brahma Sutras. Compared to Brahma Sutras and Upanishad commentaries, Bhagavad Gita commentary is very, very simple. But because he wrote a commentary on it, Gita became so universal. Today everyone knows about Gita, but nobody knows about the Mahabharata. Gita is just a tiny fragment of Mahabharata. Now what is the uniqueness of Gita? Gita not only gives you philosophy, but also it provides a practical method to practice that philosophy. It gives a science and also gives an applied science of technology. So Gita gives you science of spiritual practice and also technology, a tool on how to practice spirituality. Because Gita is unique in it that it divides spiritual practitioners into karma yogis, bhakti yogis, jnana yogis and raja yogis. Raja yoga aspect goes along with other 3 yogas. Those who have an emotional temperament, they can practice bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. We are right now discussing the bhakti yoga in our Friday evening classes. Every Friday we are giving in-person classes which are available on YouTube and live stream, and also Bhakti Yoga, the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita text. Now, Gita's uniqueness is that it divides spiritual seekers into 3 categories, mainly. Those who are of an intellectual temperament, they are okay, Jnana Yoga. Those who are of an emotional temperament, Bhakti Yoga. And there are those who are of an active temperament. They want to do work, they want to do something. They can practice karma yoga. All these three yogas can take you to the highest level of mental purity and eventually to spiritual emancipation. So, Bhagavad Gita is Smriti Prasthana, Brahma Sutra is Nyaya Prasthana, and Upanishads constitute Shruti Prasthana, related to the Vedas. These are the three great foundational canonical traditions of Indian philosophy. So, we should understand what Upanishad means. Upanishad is essentially not the name of a book, but it is something that takes you to the highest spiritual liberation. Books are important. So, as a secondary source, books are important. As a primary source, experience alone is important. Brahma Sutras, they describe, they explain logically, and they analyze these Upanishadic teachings, quotations from Upanishads are given, and logically analyze this philosophy. And Bhagavad Gita, along with giving this philosophical ideal, it also provides a tool for us to practice spirituality. Any person who reads the Bhagavad Gita can accommodate spirituality as part of his life. If he is a professor, he can also be a follower of the Gita. He need not even belong to any religious tradition to practice karma yoga. Even agnostics and atheists can practice karma yoga. That's an important thing. Karma yoga doesn't insist that you should believe in God or go to a temple or a place of worship. No. Karma yoga actually tells you, do your work, whatever that work may be. The work may be worship, which is of course a part of religious ceremony. Meditation, which is of course a spiritual practice. And also maybe working in Trader Joe's, in the markets. Whatever work you do, secular work. Selling, if you are working in a market, it is certainly not a spiritual place, formally speaking. But there also you can practice spirituality. Do whatever you do with detachment, with total dedication, with a sense of sanctity, sacredness, but without any selfish attachment, selfish motive. In my Gita classes, I often give the example of Gandhi. Because Mahatma Gandhi was not living in a forest, everyone knows. Most of the time he was giving headache to the colonial rulers, organizing people, big processions, and quitting their movement, and suddenly he goes to fasting, and suddenly he gives some instructions. He'll go to round table, go to London, talk to the big dignitaries and coming back. But all that he considers a spiritual practice. That's something interesting. Can you imagine going to London for round table conference or driving the British rulers crazy by leading agitation against the colonial rule? That was for him a spiritual practice. So it's an extreme example of somebody who can bring spirituality into the so-called secular field of activities. So that's the uniqueness of Gita. Gita gives a tool for everyone. If you are an emotional temperament, you can practice all the traditional devotional disciplines you can practice. If you are an intellectual person, there are people who believe, and I won't believe in God or anything, I believe in some kind of a universal, divine something, all right, fine, Jnana Yoga is okay for you. And all these will help you to eventually realize the truth of what the Upanishads teach. That's a connection of Gita. Now we will conclude and we will have interaction, and we will continue from next session onwards. Most welcome with questions. You are most welcome. Thank
you. Swami?
Yeah.
How is it decided that something is an Upanishad? Like, I think you've mentioned that there are many Upanishads
Yeah.
Shankara did not write commentaries on.
Yeah.
Why are those called Upanishads? How do we know that those are Upanishads?
Oh yeah, in fact, manuscripts were found in later times. Remember, that's a different subject related to manuscriptology. Manuscriptology. So you find Sanskrit manuscripts are found all over the world. In Germany, in British Museum Library, of course, in so many other manuscript libraries spread all over India. Now, of course, with Shankaracharya's commentaries becoming popular among the intellectuals of India, the 10 Upanishads that he expounded, plus the Upanishads that he refers to in his commentaries, must have become well known. But what about other Upanishads? Many of these Upanishads were preserved in manuscript forms in different families. Remember, all these Upanishads were preserved through oral tradition, but they also wrote down in manuscripts. So today, if you visit some of the most important manuscript libraries of India, like Adayar near Chennai, and Trivandrum Manuscript Library, Mysore or Baroda, Benares, if you go to all these places, and also there are many important libraries which are well known for huge collections of Sanskrit manuscripts outside India, of course. Now the point is, by analyzing the date associated with copying down of the text on those manuscripts, they try to find out the antiquity, more or less. And then Indian families spread all over Indian subcontinent. They preserve this tradition. So many of these manuscripts were actually discovered from different ancient families. For all 3 generations living together under the same roof. So the order of the day till 30, 40 years ago. So from those manuscripts, they ascertained roughly the date. And a lot of great scholars, both Eastern and Western, were involved in this gigantic work. The work is still going on. Yeah.
In terms of how they decide it's an Upanishad, is that very esoteric?
Yeah, there is a general principle, and that's interesting. The general principle is poetical Upanishads. Upanishads are more or less they follow the Vedic meters, Anushtup, Gayatri, etc. They are considered to be less ancient, and Upanishads, which are in prose form, are considered to be more ancient. For example, Taittiriya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Aitareya Upanishad. These Upanishads are considered to be just a few like that, are considered to be more ancient than, let us say, Kathopanishad or Ishavasya Upanishad, which are in verses. So the metrical form must have been a later development. And there are some Upanishads which combine both poetic and also prose forms. So they are also considered to be more ancient than Upanishads which follow a specified pattern which conform to the principles of Sanskrit prosody. They follow certain meters. Sanskrit is very rich in its prosody meters. That's one thing. So prose Upanishads are considered to be more ancient compared to poetical Upanishads. But in reality, if you are a literary student, you find poetical works are more ancient than prose works. It's the other way around. It's an important thing. All the great works of ancient times, Mahabharata, Ramayana is considered to be the oldest of poetical work in Sanskrit tradition. It is in very, very simple poetic form. Ramayana is relatively very simple compared to Bhagavad Purana, which is relatively more modern, with very complex meters, complex formations of verses you find in the Bhagavad Purana. But Valmiki Ramayana is very simple. Bhagavad Gita is very simple, mostly Anushtup meter. Mahabharata, ancient. But in Upanishadic tradition, the irregular Upanishads, in prose forms, are considered to be more ancient compared to Upanishads which are in verses. That's a general tradition. Yeah.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
Last week you mentioned that there are 6 steps to understand the text, that you must know the beginning and the conclusion, and what is unique, and so on. What is the source of these 6 steps? In which document does it first appear?
Yeah. Well, Talparya Nirnaya it is called. Shadvidha Talparya Nirnaya. Talparya means the essence of a text. Shadvidha means 6 ways, 6 methods. Nirnaya means decision, how to decide the topic of a text. So
in which document does it first appear that these are the 6?
I tell you, if you ask me this question, I can only tell you that my teacher taught me. Because there are many verses which we cannot really be sure from which book it comes from. But the verse I quote, for example, the definition of Bharata Vasha in Vishnu Purana, we can see. But Shadvidha Talparya Nirnaya was a tradition followed by all great scholars. Upakrama Upasamkhara Abhyasa Purvada Phalam Arthavado Upapaticha Lingam Talparya Nirnaya means. Upakrama means the beginning, how a text begins. Upasamkhara means how it concludes. Abhyasa means what idea is repeated again and again. Apurvada means the uniqueness of that book. Phalam means what special benefit is proclaimed in connection with reading that book. And Arthavada means praising, extolling something. And again, Upapatti means the method of logical analysis. I mean, what idea is logically analyzed and explained in that book. So that should be the central theme of that text. That's the idea. It is Shadvidha Talparya Nirnaya. Now, this is normally... Now remember, among Indian philosophers, they will try to apply these 6 tools in their own way. Advaitins may try to expound Advaita is the essence of this text, using all this. But I mentioned to you, in Madhva tradition, Vyasatirtha says, Tattwamasi is not, it is Atattwamasi. So Atma Tattwamasi Shvetakedo, Aidadatmamidam Satyam Atma Tattwamasi Shvetakedo. So Atma is one word. It is Akara, Dirgha Akara. But Madhva tradition tells you that the A should be connected to Ta, means Atattwamasi. You are not that truth you are looking for. They keep you put opposite. So these are different, these are certain dialectical methods which you may not consider to be very, very admirable. Somewhat you may think it is rather questionable. But an intellectual warfare, there is a great joy. It also speaks volumes about the refinement of this intellectual culture. But also, I mean, sometimes it can become very wild also. Atma Atattwamasi. That's the opposite. So, because akara, if you add before a consonant, the meaning become opposite. An, if you add before a vowel, then also meaning. Ishta means anishta. An plus ishta, anishta. Ishta means what you like, what is likeable to you. An, if you add, opposite. So a, if you add to a consonant like ta, then it becomes opposite. So he takes this a from Atma and add to the other one, because the mantra follows like that. Anyway, it is a different, some kind of dialectical method which you may not perhaps be happy with in modern times. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to go next. Thank you, Swami, for the lecture.
Yeah.
I actually had a question on etymology. I was hesitant to ask it, but now that we are on the topic on an and a, so I heard param being mentioned. So is that related to para in English, as in paranormal, or like ortho, meta, para in chemistry, or paramount, like param?
Oh, para, apara. Now, what I said earlier is related to grammar. It's not relevant in our context, of course. Tattvamasi, atattavamasi, etc. What you mentioned, para, apara. So, if a visheshana is an adjective, it follows the same linga, the same gender or number of what it qualifies. So, vidya, paravidya. So, the vidya is a strilinga, means a feminine gender, so they become para, otherwise become param, if it is neutral gender, paraha becomes, it is feminine gender. It's a different subject. Now the point is, there are people who try to connect, para in Sanskrit means paramount, important, supreme, so paramount something. Well, I think there are people who do that, have two answers. One answer is, it is not directly linked to our subject. Secondly, sometimes it can become very wild. People try to connect every Sanskrit word with some word from Indo-Germanic groups of languages. Of course, there is a close connection between Sanskrit and all the languages belonging to Indo-Germanic group of languages, including English, as you wrote English. But the point is, it can sometimes go wild. Those who know Latin, those who know Greek may find a close affinity with many words in Sanskrit, with many words in classical Greek or Latin. That's because these languages all belong to Indo-Germanic group of languages. But whether paramount, para are related, difficult to say, because I'm not competent to speak about the connection between classical Latin and classical Greek with Sanskrit, because I'm not competent to say anything about classical Latin or classical Greek or English words which may have received these from classical Latin or Greek. I should remember, many of the terms used in English, they derive their origin from the connection with the roots available in Latin or Greek. So I'm not, I cannot consider myself to be an authority in that area. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Swami, thank you very much for Prasthantrahi.
Yeah.
My question is, for a spiritual seeker, what should be the practical sequence? Is it okay to start with sadhana prasthana first, then move to sutra prasthana, and then finally getting deeper into upadesh prasthana? All the sequences other way. What would make more practical sense to for a seeker?
Yeah, if you are talking about Advaita Vedantic tradition, I would rather say that you should read, the first book you should read should be a primer. It is not a small book, more than 400 verses, 500 verses, could be Viveka Chudamani, because it contains the disciplines and also clear descriptions of an ideal student, an ideal teacher, what should be our approach to Vedanta, and what are the prerequisites for every beginner, and how to proceed, what are the dangers, what are the risks, and all these elementary questions are discussed in detail in Viveka Chudamani. It is one of the minor works. It doesn't have the prominence of one of the books of Prasthanatraya. I mean, the 10 Upanishad commentaries, Brahma Sutras and Gita, all day together constitute Prasthanatraya. So, but long before you enter any of these books, you should read some elementary introductory works. And actually there are shorter works like Tattva-bodha, Atma-bodha, etc. They are mostly about definitions of technical terms and so on. But I would always recommend Viveka-Chudamani as the most important, as the most complete among the shorter introductory works for any student of Vedanta. It is short, at the same time it is not as small as Atma-bodha or Tattva-bodha, but it also talks about our own qualifications, how we should approach a student, a teacher, what are the prerequisites for an ideal student. All these are explained. Plus sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. The 4 important qualifications for every Vedantic student are clearly articulated during the earlier verses in the Viveka-Chudamani. So Viveka-Chudamani is the book that everyone should study. Small children may study shorter books. Viveka-Chudamani is complete, and after that you find you can approach any other Vedantic book. It will be very helpful. Yeah. Viveka-Chudamani. Say.
Yeah, Swami, I remember about 2 years back you started Viveka-Chudamani in Milpitas when we used to come and in person attend Ramakrishna Mission. So I was fortunate to listen to you. That was the Viveka-Chudamani, beginning of our induction in this discourse. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Then COVID came and we had to suspend the in-person sessions in Milpitas. Okay, thank you.
But it is so good to know that we are still continuing the same tradition. First in person in Milpitas and now continuing for 2 years virtually. So thank you very much.
Also, I taught in Stanford for the students. They used to assemble Viveka-Chudamani for for a long time. I taught many other books also. Okay, so thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Do any of these principal Upanishads or any other Upanishads touch upon the cosmology and other subjects other than philosophical?
No, they do discuss cosmology. In Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishad, you find cosmology is discussed. Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya. And also in the Taittiriya, because the idea that this universe goes through these continuing cycles of projection, not creation, but projection. Creation is not a word that Vedantic literature will agree with. Instead of projection, and then existence, then dissolution, and reprojection, it's called. So these continuing cycles of existence, cosmos, through different forms. And also there are references to different worlds, different lokas. So where people live for a long time. So these subjects are discussed in the Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, and to some extent in Taittiriya and so on.
Pranam Swamiji.
Namaskar.
My question is, I listened to another teacher who made the statement that by reading and understanding the Upanishads, you can attain fearlessness. I wonder if you agree with that, and if you do, how is that attained? How is fearlessness attained by studying the Upanishads?
Now, Swami Vivekananda also says, Swamiji says very clearly, Abhi, you can become fearless by studying Vedanta or Upanishads. But real fearlessness comes when you realize your true identity, which is other than your body. That's an important body-mind complex, so to speak. So, study of Upanishads will certainly give you an intellectual idea as to what your true nature is, which is not this body or mind. Because every fear has some connection with the fear of death. That's what Vedanta says. Every fear. Actually, when we become extremely obsessed with a problem, because we think somehow it can affect our health, or something that we have will go away. So, every fear has got some connection with the fear of death. So, and actually, death is the most unavoidable, the most certain reality in our life, something that we are not mentally ready to accept. This is an important thing. Intellectually we may be able to accept, but very unpleasant to accept. So how to go beyond fear to understand that we are not this body, and we are something which is not going to die, and this death is nothing but a coma, just a transit point in this long journey. In fact, this subject is profoundly discussed between a husband and wife in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And the husband is Yajnavalkya, who later becomes a monk, takes a sannyasa. He expresses his desire to become a monk. I had done a retreat, a number of classes on this subject itself here. That is Yajnavalkya Maitreyi Sambhadaha, dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Maitreyi. When Yajnavalkya decided to become a monk, he wanted to leave all that he had behind, and then wanted to go to forest and renounce his world. Then, and he also said, I should hand over to you. He told Maitreyi, his wife, he told Maitreyi, I shall hand over to you whatever I have. And then she thought he was giving her something that he himself wanted to renounce, going for something which must be superior to what he is renouncing now. I want that which you plan to get, which you are planning to achieve by giving up this. So what is that? So she asked this question, am I going to become immortal by getting all this wealth that you are offering to me? Because you are going to renounce everything, handing over to me. Then Yajnavalkya said, no. What money or what wealth I am going to give you, that can only give you what wealth can buy. Nothing more, nothing less. Then I want that which you are seeking. Not the one that you wanted to renounce, but the one that you are going to attain by renouncing this. Then Yajnavalkya, there is a dialogue. It is called Amrita. Amrita means deathless, immortal, eternal. How I am going to become Amrita? How I am going to become eternal? Means beyond, transcending death, going beyond death. And how do you do that? By discovering your own deathless identity. Our deathless identity is not the body. It cannot be deathless, or Atman. So finally, Maitreyi realizes that. She attains deathlessness. So the point is, if you study the Upanishads, you can get an intellectual idea, but it is possible. Remember, Swami Vivekananda again and again repeats this idea. You can become abhi, fearless, by studying Vedanta. Because by studying Vedanta, you suddenly discover, well, I am not a pauper. I am a rich man. I have plenty of money in the bank. What is that money? Our true spirituality, our spiritual identity. It's just like a billionaire suddenly being under the delusion that he is a pauper, and he cries and weeps and asks for $1, becomes a beggar. But if you tell him, no, you have a checkbook in your pocket and a fountain pen and plenty of billions of dollars in the bank, suddenly he realizes, this is my true identity. He no longer begs. He is no longer a beggar. Similarly, when we discover our true identity, spiritual identity. We are the deathless, immortal, eternal Atman. And this body, which is certainly bound to disappear one day, is only part of this game of life. Death is not a full stop, it is only semicolon or a comma at the most. That's what Vedanta teaches. In this sense, Swami Vivekananda says that Upanishads can teach you to become fearless. That's the idea behind it. Actually, it is a great feeling, when you suddenly realize, well, I am not just this body. I am in this body, just you are traveling, you take a car, you rent a car and go to some place and you give the car back to the place. And you rent another car next life. Like that, we have only rented this body. It's not yours really. You have to give back the rented car to its owner, the company. So once you realize this, then you don't worry when somebody tells you, no, after reaching your destination, you have to give back your rented car. You are not going to cry and weep. Why should you be afraid? If somebody tells you, no, this car is not yours, you have to give back this car to the rental company, with check, of course. Like that, a person who at least intellectually understands the truth of Upanishads can feel this fearlessness. That's what Swami Vivekananda stressed again and again throughout his lectures, actually. But his real ultimate realization comes when you experience. Of course, remember, once you are fully convinced, then it's almost like boarding a bus which is bound to reach the destination at some point of time. So thank you everyone for the questions, and hopefully we'll continue in the next session. Everyone, namaskar. Right. Yeah.